Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon. My name is Kobus Burgers. Let me just click my webcam on here. I hope everyone can see me, and very welcome to our session for this afternoon. I've got two other panelists that is also going to help and assist during the presentation this afternoon. Hendrik de Bruin, who is our director for our cybersecurity solutions, and then we have Brendan Meyer from Micro Focus that is also going to present. As I see that we have quite a number of people today, there we can see Brendan as well and Hendrik as well. As I see that we have quite a number of people that have never dealt with NetCB before, I'm going to do a brief introduction of NetCB as a company, that you know who we are and what we do. And then I'm going to hand over to Hendrik, that is going to give a brief overview of NetCB's approach to cybersecurity. And then Brendan is going to delve into the cyber resilience aspect of organizations, which has become a very critical aspect and it should be the top priority for any organization today when it comes to your cyber resilience and how you look after your cybersecurity components within the organization. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, Kobus, we can.
Thanks. Now, today, just to set the theme for today, before I start with NetCB, I think this cartoon strip that you see on the screen tells a very good story about how critical it has become to look after cybersecurity and cyber resilience within organizations today. And quite often we found that there's still so many gaps in the whole security framework within organizations, and they have quite a siloed approach towards cybersecurity that almost prevent them to become cyber resilient within such an organization. Now, when I talk about NetCB itself, we're now in our 20th year of business. We have got quite a strong and solid client base. We actually have got clients across the globe based on our own software development, although our focus is very much predominantly on the African continent. Our core solution focus areas is obviously cybersecurity. That encompasses quite a wide spectrum of solutions. Digital workspaces, as well as solutions for the hybrid cloud. We deliver all our solutions through a wide range of services, through managed support services, specialist hosted services. We've got various service level agreement models, very effective project management mechanisms. We assist our organizations always with information technology architecture, policy and strategy. And the most important part is the skills development and change management within organizations. It is quite often a mammoth task to implement many of these solutions to ensure that it is done the right way and the most effective way. NetCB as a company is also a software vendor ourselves. We've developed our own records management solution, particularly within the South African municipality environment, which is called hybrid RMS. We've also developed for our group-wise clients a range of solutions that allow them to migrate some of their data into other platforms, especially from a document management perspective, as well as many of our existing group-wise clients that required a wide range of video conferencing add-ons, and we developed a very powerful video conferencing add-on for group-wise that is now being used by organizations across the world. CYBE delivers our solutions through our partnerships with various technology partners. Today, we're going to focus predominantly on Micro Focus, which is also one of our primary partners, based on their exceptional range of solutions. We quite often refer to Micro Focus as our vendor agnostic vendor, because Micro Focus works with every other vendor. And it is an ideal solution to manage your security within your organization, because they work with almost each and every other vendor in the industry. CYBE is also has got a distribution division where we also have a range of solutions that are being provided, where CYBE is the sole distributor on the African continent for these solutions. And these solutions we only provide through our partner network. This is just a snapshot of some of our clients that we've been working with on an ongoing basis. Predominantly, a number of them are in the South African government space. We have exceptional experience within that environment. But even from a central bank perspective, as well as within the educational sector, where we work with quite a range of universities and assisting them with their identity security solutions. As I mentioned before, CYBE doesn't only work in South Africa. We have done projects in many other countries on the African continent. Normally, when I show this slide, we have a competition to people must name the countries with the flags, but today we really don't have time for that. But as you can see, we now also have clients even as far as in the United States and in some European countries as well. If you want to learn a little bit more about CYBE after today's webinar, you're welcome to visit our website. We also have a YouTube channel where this video will also be made available, as well on the GoToStage platform of GoToWebinar, where we also have a channel. You can just type in CYBE at the end of the URL and you will find us on those sites. Now, before I hand over to Hendrik, you are more than welcome, as we present today, to post questions in the Q&A section. That will, and as we go along, we will respond to those questions. We want this session to be interactive as far as possible. Also remember that at the end of this webinar this afternoon, you will be prompted to complete a survey. And we would like you to also complete that survey at the end of today's webinar. Hendrik, I'm going to hand over to you now, so I'm going to make you presenter.
Thank you, Cobus. I'll just wait for that so I can select the appropriate screen. Here we go. Show. Okay, so just for introductory sake, I'll switch on my camera before I hide my face for radio, as they say. Just some of my credentials. I've spent about 20 years of my life in the IT and cybersecurity industry, as you can see by my progressive hairstyle. I am CISSP certified as well, and yeah, I love talking about all things cybersecurity. So if any of you want to reach out to me afterwards, you're welcome to send me an email and or phone us, and just ask for me, and we can have a chat about cybersecurity after this as well. Okay, so can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Excellent, thank you, Cobus. Okay, so the first slide really, I think, also talks to that first slide that Cobus showed with that little cartoon. And the reality is, people, we need to wake up. Wake up and smell the coffee. Cyber attacks are a reality. It's not a case of if, it's a case of when. And we are all susceptible to this. You know, small organizations, large organizations, private sector, educational, government, public sector, we are all potential victims of cybercrime. And as I mentioned there, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And attackers, the reality is, if they want your information, if they want to get into your environment, they will get into your environment. And merely having a firewall protecting your infrastructure is clearly inefficient. And it's because, as I mentioned, if they want in, they'll get in. And I like to equate that to normal physical security infrastructure. If you look at your house, if somebody wants to get in, first they'll try the front door. Perhaps the front door is unlocked. They'll get lucky. They'll get in. But if they really want something that's inside your home, and the front door is locked, they'll find a different way, even if it means blowing up the side of your house and using that as forced entry. They will get in and they will get that prize that they are after. It's just a question of how long it takes them and the amount of noise they generate while getting access to that data or information that they are after. And the reality is, you cannot prevent this. This is part of modern life. We live in a connected world where everybody are communicating constantly. You cannot restrict access to systems based on security, etc. You have to allow for communication, for business to continue, etc. But be aware of the fact that cybersecurity must be a top priority within your organization. So just some statistics that I gathered, as a matter of interest. So firstly, we are currently the third hardest hit nation in the world when it comes to cyber attacks. And that is significant, because in the global picture, if we look at things like GDP, everywhere else we don't really feature, but if we look at cyber attacks, we feature. We are the third hardest hit nation in the world. So based on cyber attacks and the amount of damages that occur because of those things, we're looking at about 2.2 billion rand per annum that's being lost due to cyber attacks. Some notable recent incidents that we can mention, TransUnion, Experian is another one. Transnet last year got a large ransomware attack, which essentially left the entire organization crippled. The import-export sector suffered huge losses because they couldn't process packages at the ports of entry, etc. Massive damages. And these are all things that can be prevented by implementing things like due care and due diligence. Even our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, has been, his information has been breached twice. We recently found out that even his cell phone has been compromised using the Pegasus software from the NSO group in Israel. So even individuals are being attacked, notable individuals like Cyril Ramaphosa, who's supposed to have the best security for himself, but yet they managed to get access to his information. Okay, so how do these attacks happen nowadays? We have the following slide will explain how these attacks occur. But let's look at the typical incidents that occur nowadays and how these incidents occur and why cybersecurity is an ever-evolving landscape. So firstly, we now have a new threat in the form of something called ransomware as a service. So, there's everything else as a service, why not ransomware? But what that really means is you've got ransomware groups who's basically signing you up as a service provider. So you can online request access to their ransomware software. They'll provide you the source code. You basically compile that source code yourself, deploy it within your, within the infrastructure that you're targeting. They take 20% and you get 80% of the ransom that you then, extort from that organization or customer, or not customer only, but organization or individual, etc. So that's a reality nowadays where you can simply recompile these ransomware code and generate a new strain. So your typical antivirus solutions will never detect these ransomware strains, these malware strains. You've also now got what they call access brokers. These are your traditional hackers. These are the guys who will sit and find vulnerabilities on websites, perhaps get access to an endpoint somewhere, etc. Instead of going the whole hog, as they say, ransoming the environment, etc. They will rather sell those credentials to these ransomware groups, for a certain fee, and leave those ransomware groups to do the actual dirty job. And I mentioned there because hackers also need CVs, also have CVs. So you've got another threat that started about 2 years ago, etc., which really relates to opportunistic or desperate individuals, where they actually offer employees within organizations the opportunity to sell their own credentials to these ransomware groups. So if you look in your own environment where perhaps there's people suffering financially, etc., because of the economic factors we currently have, each one of those individuals could become a potential threat, because they might be selling their own VPN credentials or their own directory credentials or their own email credentials, to malicious actors on the internet, etc. So that's a massive threat, a threat that your antivirus and your firewalls, etc., won't be able to protect you from. So threats are more sophisticated and undetected by antivirus and firewalls. If you look at fileless attacks, where you can actually download malware into memory through PowerShell, utilize that to dump credentials, or for purposes of lateral movement, etc. Active Directory has become a massive attack vector. I actually refer to it as the autobahn for lateral movement, because once you've got a single set of Active Directory credentials, it's extremely easy to enumerate the rest of the information from Active Directory. Once you've got that information, if there's things like weak service account passwords, it's very simple to collect that hash, brute force it online, and utilize that for things like privilege escalation, lateral movement, etc. Active Directory is a massive problem within infrastructures if it is not adequately configured and protected. And the reality is, antivirus, once again, your firewall, once again, won't be able to protect you from these type of attacks, because if you look at things like golden ticket attacks, silver ticket attacks, faster hash attacks, etc., these are normal Active Directory Kerberos authentication functions. This is not something added, out of the normal happening on your network. This is not malware on your network. It's the abuse of normal processes within your environment. Often, little skills are required to gain access. If you look at the attacks, the Colonial Pipeline in the US a couple of years ago, where it was a credentials that was found through a LinkedIn breach. They used those credentials to log on to a VPN account within Colonial Pipeline, and almost held the whole east coast of the US to ransom. And the reality is, once again, it should have been an account that should have been deprovisioned. It's an account that was an individual that left years ago, that they never disabled his account. TransUnion, it was a password that the attackers used to gain access to the systems. And then organizations, as I've mentioned numerous times now, still rely on antivirus and firewalls, but it is ineffective and it does not offer sufficient protection. Okay, so how does these typical cyber attacks occur? So typically you have at item 0 there on the left-hand side, recognition of the target. The attacker will decide who's the target. From there, they'll get access to an endpoint. This endpoint can be either a workstation through something like a phishing attack, etc., that contains a download link to malware, or perhaps it's an existing vulnerability on one of your servers that's exposed on the internet. However they get access to that endpoint, once they've got initial access, what they'll do is to gain additional access on that device through means of local privilege escalation. This could be by means of dumping the administrative credentials from the LSAS memory in the case of Windows. Perhaps there's a file that's got write access on a server on a Linux host owned by root that can be used to escalate privileges. But once they've got additional privileges on their device, they'll start to do infrastructure enumeration, because typically the attacker is not after the information on your web server or the information on that user's endpoint. They are after the corporate information. They are after the customer information, etc. So in order to gain that access to that information, they will start to do things like infrastructure enumeration, port scans. I mentioned Active Directory earlier. They've got access to one Active Directory credential. They can use that to do further enumeration of Active Directory, and then through that process, perform lateral movement. Once they have got lateral movement, they actually jump or move on towards your actual servers where the data is maintained. That's where they have valued target access. From there, once again, they'll try and get as most access as possible on that device by means of, once again, privilege escalation. Once they've got that, they'll set up a mechanism for persistence. And this is where, once again, Active Directory, as an example, plays a role, where they will set a Kerberos or create a Kerberos golden ticket, which essentially allows them access back into your infrastructure until the time where organizations change something like the KRBTGT account passwords, which I know never happens in most organizations. That means the attacker continues to have access within your infrastructure without you even knowing it. Once they've set up persistence, they'll typically start to exfiltrate the data if that's what they intend to do with the data, holding it ransom, and then from there either destroy the information or encrypt it. But typically, in this stage of the attack, it's often less sophisticated. You're gaining access to the endpoints, etc., and it becomes more sophisticated, etc. But the purpose of this slide is really to explain how attacks occur and how important it is to understand that you have to take a holistic view when it comes to cybersecurity. You cannot just look at which ports are open on the internet or what files my end users are downloading, and if those files are potential malware or virus files. You have to take a holistic view and look at much more. You have to look at the actual processes within your environment, etc. And that's where NetCB really plays a role. So we've taken a look at cybersecurity from a holistic view, where we take a look at things like people. How can we reduce cyber attacks by educating people, creating awareness about things like phishing campaigns, etc. Having phishing simulations within their environment to start to educate people, to show them that this is the potential when you click on these links, etc. So you need to start to look at people and how you can educate them with regards to cybersecurity. You need to take a look at your processes within your organization. How does things like provisioning within your organization, within your environment occur? How is access granted? More importantly, from a security perspective, how is actually access removed from these systems? Is it automated? Is it manual? Is there actually a process in place to remove access when people leave the organization? How often do we do things like access review to ensure that we don't have access creep, where somebody who started in the organization perhaps as in finance and then moved to sales or something to that effect, they keep on getting additional access and the original access is never really removed. Things like role certification. Does your organization, do you ever review the roles within your organization and the members of those roles? And then the last point there, DevSecOps. If you have development operations within your environment, do you include security inside that process to ensure that when you develop solutions that they are secure from the get-go instead of bolting on security afterwards? So processes, we can assist with looking at processes, Governance. If you look at organizations, things like separation of duties, segregation of duties, concepts of least privilege and privileged account management, etc. You need to look at all those type of items within your organization. And then from a management perspective, ensure that there's regular things like penetration testing, vulnerability assessments, and if you have Active Directory within your infrastructure, ensure that you have regular Active Directory security assessments. And this is really where NetCB can also assist you, where we can take you across this entire journey. We can assist you in looking at the people, processes, governance, as well as management. And we ultimately utilize technology to enable these type of services and processes. Some of the technology that we have available within our portfolio, there's too many acronyms really to mention, but we've got things like security information event management systems, information and access governance solutions, application security solutions, endpoint detection and remediation, honeypots deception, intrusion protection, intrusion prevention systems, etc. So the point that I'm trying to bring across is that if you're looking at cybersecurity, you have to take a holistic approach. You cannot look at it in isolation, in isolated systems or isolated processes. You have to take a holistic view, and NetCB has the capability and the ability to assist your organization with that. And we make use of various technology components from our partners such as Micro Focus and the CYBERSECURITY solution stack. That's it from my side. Thank you very much. Cobus, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Okay, thank you, Hendrik. And Brendan, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Perfect. Give me 1 second. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Cobus and Hendrik, for the introduction and allowing me to present today. In today's session, I'll be touching around how we can use cyber or identity and the concept around identity to help you increase your resiliency. From my side, my name is Brendan Meyer. I am a pre-sales consultant at Micro Focus South Africa, or essentially focused on the CYBERSECURITY security stack. Again, thank you for everybody's participation today. Let me quickly do that, and I'll quickly share my screen. Okay, perfect. Just want to confirm everybody can see my screen.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Okay, so I understand that a lot of people do not like death by presentation, but in today's session, I really want to take everybody through how CyberRes can essentially help you, typically through telling you a story of how organizations out there are facing these problems and how we help them in it. Now, from a CyberRes perspective, we are a Micro Focus line of business company. CyberRes is essentially the security and stack from Micro Focus. Now, for those of you that are not aware of Micro Focus, Micro Focus historically is a pure software vendor. They're in the top 10 from a pure software perspective, and historically speaking, they come from the likes of Cobalt and Delphi days way back when, and over the years acquired numerous technology stacks to become one of the biggest software vendors out there. Now, as CyberRes, as a division from Micro Focus on the security side, we have a few technology stacks that I want to just do a quick overview on for everybody, just to understand what else we can do from CyberRes. We cover a massive amount of security solution sets out there, and in today's session I'll be focusing on the NetIQ solution stack, but let me just take you through a few of these. So we have our Voltage security stack, and this is focused around data privacy, essentially helping you discover what data you have inside your environment, providing you with insight around your structured and unstructured data, as well as assisting you from a protection perspective. A big big strong point if you're looking at POPIA compliance, and this is where our voltage stack assists us. Now, from a NetIQ stack, we have our identity and access management solutions. Here we focus around the concept of joiner, mover, leaver lifecycle from a user perspective, not just workforce, but also from a citizen perspective. And there's a few other concepts around MFA and privileged account management, etc., etc. But I'll do a deep dive into that today. We then have our Fortify solution stack. Now, Fortify essentially helps you and your organization, especially from a development perspective. This is where Hendrik specifically spoke about the DevSecOps component. This is how we help you shift left from your software development lifecycle and essentially help you implement security in your code before it actually goes to production. This is typically done through active scanning from a SAST and a DAST, or from a dynamic perspective. We also then have the ability to look at open source initiatives or open source code that you make use of within your environment. And from a development perspective, help you do that integration so that security is part of the software development lifecycle. We then have our Oxide solution offering. Now, Oxide, many of you are aware, is one of the world's best SIEM SOAR solutions out there. And till today, this is one of our Gartner leaders, especially in the SOC space, and it really drives our security operations offerings out there. We also then team up with machines, and this is where our Intercept component, and you'll notice it's in the middle here, our Intercept, which is essentially our UBA or our machine learning component, ties directly into our Oxide solution offering, but not just into our Oxide solution offering. We also have the ability to tie it into any of our other solution offerings and provide the risk metrics provided from the UBA capabilities and use that inside other solution sets. So in today's session, I really want to dive into identity and the concept around, as Hendrik rightfully mentioned, how identity has become the new perimeter. We can have the greatest firewalls and the most expensive firewalls, but if an identity gets breached or identity's information gets leaked, you are as vulnerable as anyone else out there that's identity's been breached. Now, if you historically look at it, we have never been in control of our own identities. We have always been given an identity. And that, if you look at it from a use case perspective, identity has been given to you by your government. You as an organization might be responsible to give identity to your workforce, or even to your clients and or citizens that might be making use of your services. And at the end of the day, it becomes really this new perimeter, and you are in the forefront of helping to fight threats and essentially prove compliance around a lot of the identity conversations out there. So before I can really dive into our story today, I need to set the foundation around a few key concepts, and again, there's a lot of acronyms in this space, but essentially to help you just understand what identity and access management means and is. So the first pillar I've now spoken around is digital identity. Digital identity is not necessarily seen as just a warm bodies identity that's its digital version of it. It can also be seen as a bot or IoT devices, service account, or service accounts that you are making use of can all be seen as identities. From a UBA perspective as well, identities can also then essentially be seen as an entity, and entities can essentially be devices, or can essentially be a warm body as well. And that's where our UBA component makes that link between the device and identity for you. Then from the next pillar we're looking at is authentication. Now, authentication really dives into concepts around proving who you are. And that's essentially easy if only you know what your username and password is. But as soon as that username and password is breached, anyone or an attacker can then essentially make as if he is you. This is where concepts come in from a MFA perspective, or 2FA, and how we would essentially add additional factors and provide a framework around second factor authentication to our identities, but also then looking at concepts around single sign-on and tokenized authentication, and how authentication standards have evolved to facilitate the movement to cloud and SaaS offerings out there. Our third pillar really looks at access rights, okay, and this really comes down to us answering the question, who has access to what, number one, and how do we enforce the concept of least privileged. And this really requires a lot of organizations to have a deep understanding of access and how access and roles and entitlements work. Do they classify what do they classify as a technical role? What do they classify as a business role? And this is where this pillar comes in. And the last pillar here is really visibility and control. This is where we want to see what is happening inside our environment. This can typically be done from a SIEM solution, gaining more visibility, but it can also be done from a governance capability where we gain more visibility around who has access to what, for instance. And then finally, from a visibility and control perspective, it comes down to compliance and reporting and providing that information to auditors and the powers that might require more visibility in your environment. So in today's session, I'll be taking you through a little bit of this roller coaster ride of how a specific identity gets provisioned inside an environment. So this is this use case we start with is essentially the use case around birthright access. So typically when a new employee starts, we want them to have a specific set of access already given to them based off of their, let's say, business role or birthright profile. Good example would be I am in the HR department or finance department. Tomorrow I start day one and I need access to the finance printer or the finance file share by default, but I also need automatically have access to my Active Directory account, as well as to email and to a few finance mailboxes, for instance. Again, it's just an example here, but that's essentially the concept that we will be driving and showing today. Then we will look at how we could request access, not just from a IT person requesting access, but actually, empowering business to do access requests and going through that cycle. We then look at if something goes wrong, what and how can we detect what went wrong, and how can we see that a policy violation has taken place. Apologies. Okay. We then see how we can we then look at how we can proactively disable access, and then finally look at how we can prove compliance. So scenario one, birthright access. So as part of birthright access, with any good story, we have a few good actors here. We have our program manager, Steve, we have HR, Eva, and we have our I want to call him a bad actor, but we have a external contractor, Mr. Kim Long, and these are the actors that will go through with the birthright access use case. Now, from a birthright access workflow perspective and how typically this would work is with any organization, when a new employee starts, HR would typically create their credentials or information on the HR system. This is typically seen as the authoritative source, and that authoritative data then can be used across your identity and access management stack, and access can then, based off of his birthright profile, be automatically fulfilled and provisioned for Mr. Kim. Now, again, this touches on the joiner, mover, leaver conversation here. So when Kim joins, our identity management solution set then has integration capabilities into Microsoft and a few other systems. And then based off of their birthright profile, they are automatically being given that access. The same will then happen if they move inside the environment. So if Kim moves to another department, his rights will be revoked from the one department and be granted on the other from other department. The same ultimately then happens when he leaves as well. All of his access gets revoked, not just on a single system, but across all the applications inside the environment. So here we have Mr. Kim. He's very happy. He, day one, has the ability to log in and start working. And when he logs in, you will now notice he has access to his Office 365. You'll see some Exchange access. He has access to Skype and SharePoint, and finally then obviously get access to the internet. But now at the bottom there, you'll see there's a few grayed out items, and we'll now look at how Kim would get access to other systems. So in scenario 2, we will be looking at how access requests can take place. In this case, Steve Palmer, the program manager, now is going to be requesting access on behalf of Kim. A typical process from a process perspective is the employee or the manager can then via a self-service portal log into our solution set. And then because Kim is replacing Charlotte, he has then the ability to look at roles, okay, and look at what role Charlotte, for instance, had here, and then compare the roles and then give Kim similar access, okay. And again, this needs to be taken into account here, is he is now comparing access and giving him the same access, but not necessarily enforcing the concept of least privilege. And as you'll now rightfully see, something will go wrong. But essentially, he's now compared roles, he's given roles, and suddenly you'll notice Kim's profile has more access than Charlotte's profile. And when he logs in, you'll now get access to SAP, but he has also as root access or SSH privileges to the SAP server. Okay, so here we have Mr. Kim, very happy. He's going to log in. Okay, and first thing Kim now notices, he suddenly has a reflection icon sitting on his desktop, giving him the ability to SSH into the SAP server. So what you would have now noticed is when he SSH'd in, he was Kim Long, but when he logs in and he does a who am I, he is root. So this is our privileged account manager solution set, essentially injecting credentials for a user. So essentially elevating him and giving him privileged access, but linking a identity to that privileged account. You'll now notice how Kim goes around and starts snooping around to see if he can't view passwords in clear text. And when he notices, what he also then does is he then test out to see if he can actually remove the SAP directory. So naughty little Kim here, he's now been trying to do something that he's not supposed to do. And you'll now notice when he did that RM-R on the SAP directory, and he did a who am I, his access was returned to being Kim Long. With that being said, our privileged account management solution set has the ability to, based off of specific commands, be more preventative than only reacting to it afterwards. So if something like this happens, you can prevent administrators or contractors to run specific commands without you having to try and enforce or try and tell them, listen, you're not allowed to do it, but I have no visibility around what your contractor, for instance, does. This just gives you that level, additional level of control when a privileged account is busy on a specific session. So now that Kim has done some malicious, did a malicious activity here, we now need to try and detect what went wrong here. So as part of scenario 3, we are looking at the detective control use case. We have Rob here, he's our SAP owner, but we also then have our CISO Paul, which is part of this process that takes place. Now, once a specific action like this takes place, you have the ability to then kick this off as a policy violation within our solution set. So this can be handled as a policy violation, and a review can automatically be kicked off, or you can then have the event sent to a SIEM SOC, SIEM source solution, or to our UBA solution, and based off of the information there, a review can then automatically then also be kicked off. So here's that event. It gets sent to the identity and access management system. It triggers a notification where there's a high risk activity that took place, and our SAP owner now needs to review this access or this policy violation. But in addition to that, we have an escalation to the CISO, okay, because something went wrong here. The SAP owner needs to take action, but the CISO also needs to be mindful and visible of what's going wrong inside the environment. Now, what we now see is how Rob logs into our IAM solution. He has now received a notification to review a policy violation that kicked off. So he picked up there's a access review that has been kicked off. So this is essentially a micro certification or a certification that kicked off. And he then goes and looks, what does this say? Okay, here we can see that Kim Long has privileged access. It's not based off of his business role. He's not supposed to have this access. We then have the ability to link that identity to that review and the action that took place. And we also then have the ability to look at a risk score that's associated to that entitlement or to that permission that this person has. And to complete the review, Rob then goes and he says, listen, remove the access. This is not good. He's a contractor. He's not supposed to be maintaining anything from an operating system level, and he clicks remove access. Now, because of our integration from an identity and access management perspective, Rob's access gets removed from SAP automatically. The fulfillment process is automated, and now the access is revoked. The next part is now, let's just do that. Next part is from a privileged account management perspective. And this is where the escalation has now been sent to the CISO to investigate. Again, this can be a team that investigates it. It doesn't have to be the CISO. This might just be a small organization where the CISO is just more hands-on and he wants to see events like this or escalations like this take place and be sent to him. So now he logs on to our privileged account management offering. Our privileged account manager or our privileged account manager is essentially gives you the ability to record all sessions for your privileged users or privileged sessions that take place inside your environment. We also then have the password vaulting functionality to help you inject credentials. So now you'll see you have the ability to go look at a session. Here, Paul then goes and he looks at each command that took place or that was executed. There's obviously the ability to then replay which commands were kicked off. And you would have now noticed on the previous screen, there's a risk associated to it as well. And certain commands are seen as a higher risk item and is then listed as a auditable command and then can be prevented. And that's essentially what the privileged account management system did here. Before having any downtime, it prevented that action taking place because of that command and control capability. So here we have an exact session. We can precisely see what went wrong. We can see this, and he's snooping around. He's looking at for clear text passwords, touching on privilege escalation, and how Hendrik also mentioned how a typical attacker would gain access and then look at privilege escalation to essentially focus, finally get to lateral movement and at some point try and exfiltrate data. Here we stopped that privilege escalation and stopped the attack. Even though it was just a contractor, it could have been a malicious actor as well. Okay, so now we've seen what went wrong. Okay, we've now seen how access got given. We've seen how access was requested. We've now also seen if something goes wrong that we have the ability to review what went wrong. We also then have the ability to exactly see what went wrong, but now we need to act upon what went wrong. And this is where our scenario 4 comes in, our emergency disable component. Now from an emergency disable process perspective, this is a straightforward process. You want to log in one place and you want Kim Long's all of his access be revoked in one place. Now, in traditional organizations, because they might not have an identity and access management process or system or solution in place, they would have to manually go to each application or solution offering and then revoke that access manually, and then still have to worry about might they have orphaned accounts or orphaned credentials, as Hendrik again mentioned here, the likes of Transnet, old account access was not revoked because they do not have the proper identity and access management protocols and processes in place, especially from a solution set perspective. They could not proactively do this. Okay, so how would this happen? And it is easy as logging onto the system. Just play that, okay. Paul then says, listen, I'm going to revoke him. He's now under investigation. He'll then go and search for Kim. And he'll now notice Kim's login credentials are still active. He can still log into the system, or at least log on from an Active Directory perspective. He then goes to the emergency disable button, and it's as easy as disabling his account. And this request then essentially pushes all the disable of accounts across all of the application sets, and you'll now notice his logon is now seen as false. Now, ultimately, this just allows you to be much more proactive from a response perspective. It's very easy to not have teams responding to what if something goes wrong, but here we have the ability to really respond to it. Okay, now the last scenario, and the one that a lot of us not necessarily like, is the compliance component. Now here we have John. John is our compliance officer, aka can be your auditor or your auditors that needs to prove compliance. And in the end of the day, John just wants to make sure that as an IT department, are you enforcing the following controls? Okay, are you enforcing user access policies? Are we looking at the concept and how are you enforcing the concept of least privilege? Are you addressing SOD violations and which SOD violations are addressed? And then finally, how regularly are you reviewing access? Are you looking at attestations also from a SOD and a policy violation perspective? Are you reviewing dormancy and orphaned accounts? And at the end of the day, he just wants to make sure that we are we are addressing these audit controls so that we are making sure the organization is safer. Now, with our solution, we have that ability to then just provide that immediately to him. We've now seen how we touch on privileged management. We've touched on privileged accounts. We've touched on governance and the lifecycle management and the automation from identity and access management perspective. And there's a whole bunch of other conversations that can be held here around MFA and single sign-on and self-service password reset, for instance, that can all help you address compliance and proof compliance. And at the end of the day, John just wants his reports, and he just you have the ability to give him access to dashboards. You have the ability to make him part of the review process so that he can finally give that final stamp of approval. And ultimately, you can provide him with a flurry of reports to prove that you are doing or implementing all of his audit controls. So what did we see today? Okay, we've had a look at many use cases here, but essentially we've addressed a few of some of these main use cases. The first being business efficiency. We looked at how we automatically provision an account. We looked at joiner, mover, lever process and how we suddenly gave the power to business and essentially worked with business to, from a self-service perspective, request access, remove access, or even just compare access between staff members. We then looked at privileged access and how we could give you a single view from a privileged perspective, but also then look at how privileged sessions can be recorded and how privileged credentials can then be managed by a proper privileged account management system. We then looked at how we could help you address or prevent threats. Now, this is typically done, and when we start talking threat prevention, you think SIEM, SOC, but we did this via implementing the proper review of roles and entitlements. So looking at micro-certification and certifications that kicked off, looking at detecting anomalies that might take place using SOD violations and indirectly preventing threats inside the organization. We ultimately then looked at proving compliance, and that was the reviews, but we also have the ability to not just do reviews, and again, I didn't necessarily touch on that today, but we have the ability to not just review access from a entitlement and a privilege and a role perspective, but also looking at data access governance and taking that review concept and applying that to data as well. The second to last use case we really looked at is the digital transformation use case. And what we really proved here is that we have a solution offering that has the ability to help you scale, not just to your hundreds and thousands of staff members, but also helping you to think around identity from a customer or a citizen perspective, and how you can take these same concepts and scale it to your customers or to your business partners that you might be in partnership with. And the last would be addressing the concept around IoT and how we would link a device to our identity. Now, this is typically done through our UBA solution, and what was shown here was that risk score, and this is typically that risk score is created and generated from a UBA perspective. You can obviously manually link a risk score, but we have the ability to then use risk scores from a AI perspective and use that to help you also figure out what access is supposed to be granted or given to people, or based off of risk, what access should not be given. And ultimately, in the end of the day, we are talking about maturity here. All of these concepts really you need to think of this from a maturity perspective, and understand that this might be a maturity journey that you might be going on, and not necessarily it's great that you want all the latest AI and technology, but you must understand that you are, from a maturity perspective, not necessarily ready to get to that adaptive intelligence state here. So what I showed you today was, I touched on single sign-on a bit, I touched on password management and access management, and that's typically where this maturity journey starts, okay? And looking at how accounts are managed, and understanding your role in entitlement matrices. That's essentially where this journey starts. We also then looked at a bit more mature conversation around privileged access management and the governance component, and how we would automate this, the life cycle of employees and their identity. I also spoke around MFA and additional factors, and this then helps you essentially mature your security resilience and posture, and essentially ultimately make you more resilient, because you're implementing each of these specific components to help you address risk in the end of the day. And then ultimately I spoke around our machine learning capabilities and our interset capability, where we then want to really be more adaptive and automatically adapt to scenarios that might be taking place inside your environment, and finally get you to a very mature and resilient posture, where your organization can adapt to change very, very quickly. So just from a side note here, and maybe something I have to just note here as well, our solutions aren't just necessarily a on-prem solution offering. We have SaaS offerings around this, and especially with everybody that's going on the cloud journey, this is essentially something that I just have to state. Yes, we have a very nice SaaS offering that really incorporates MFA and governance together, and the concept around a cloud identity, and really just helps you get to adapt to your cloud strategy as well. For you. Now, on that note, that was it from my side. I thank everybody for your time, and I'll hand over back to Cobus.
Thank you, Brendan. Thank you very much for this insightful session. Let me just see, do we have any questions at the moment from anyone? I haven't seen any questions popping up during the presentation. I'll open up the floor. I see there's a hand that's been raised by Pakisu. Pakisu, if you don't mind, I'm going to enable your microphone. Let me just quickly see here. Pakisu, if you just maybe try to.
Okay.
There
thank you very much. Okay, I'll just like, thank you so much. I'll appreciate if Brendan can just show me the last slide just before he left, just the last one, and then I'll be happy.
Okay, I'll quickly, Brendan,
if it's possible.
Sure,
Brendan,
no
you are back on.
Okay, no problem. Give me 1 second. Just want to confirm, so can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so thank you very much. Appreciate it. You can mute me again.
Okay.
Do you have any questions around this slide? Sorry, maybe if you want to elaborate.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. No problem.
Yes, I was busy with someone in the office here, and I didn't catch the full narrative on identity governance as a service. But I've just checked it now, and I fully understand. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Sure, no
thank you
problem.
very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone? It seems everyone is a bit shy this afternoon. You're welcome to send us email correspondence, especially based when I close the webinar after this session. Please complete the survey that will pop up. If you don't have time now to complete the survey, you will in any case receive a link tomorrow containing a link to the survey. And then you can, based on your responses on the survey, Netsibi will engage with you and set up further meetings, and maybe we will then delve on a one-to-one basis a little bit deeper with the various people that attended the webinar today. Hendrik, anything from your side?
No, nothing from my side. Thank you very much, Kobus.
So that is it from us today, and thank you very much for taking time to attend our webinar. And please look out for upcoming webinars. We run quite a number of webinars per month, and covering a wide range of topics. And some of these technologies that you've seen today, you will also see some of them in future webinars where we will drill down into specific components of what you've seen today. It is really our mission to educate our customers and partners on this journey, so you understand this is not something you can get implemented overnight. We help organizations to build the maturity within the organization to be able to achieve a very high level of cyber resilience. I thank you very much and hope to see you online soon again.